Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Triple J podcast show. We welcome everybody watching to our presentation on our content major for social context. So our topic is diversity of voices in the ELA classroom, moving past predominantly white heterosexual perspectives. We will have a list of resources in the description of this video and on Moodle. And first, I'd just like to begin with a statement on privilege for myself. So as a person who is white, cisgendered, and a heterosexual male, I don't really know what oppression is. And my comfort or my privilege, but the comfort of being in privilege is someone else's silence. So I hope by the end of this, we highlight different strategies and the issues of privilege and how we can move past the white heterosexual perspective.
Yeah, just jump in here.
Excuse me.
I'm Julia. I'm white, heterosexual, middle-class female. I'm very similar to Jason. I've never known poverty, homelessness, illness, racism, oppression. I've never been denied access to education, healthcare, or other services. And, I am the first in my family to attend university, but I've never had to question whether that was a possibility. And with my privilege comes ignorance. And sometimes that means I'm unable to see the challenges that other people face. And I can not understand a lot of things that other people experience. And I want to acknowledge that even though I am privileged and I have that ignorance, I can constantly try to be mindful and aware of what other people's experiences may be and try to understand and advocate for students' needs and just constantly learn so I can help them succeed.
Yeah, so for me, like obviously the big decider or the big thing that shows up is that obviously I'm a person of color, so I do have some type of oppression and some type of racism in my life. But then I also have to recognize that I come from a middle class family. I have university graduates within my family. And so the biggest obstacle to feeling completely oppressed is that sometimes I feel that I'm not the poster child for what Black oppression can be, because I do have a lot of things that make up for the disadvantages that most people of color would face. So I would like to point that out, is that I still haven't had to worry about when I would get food on my plate, or if I would have enough money to go to university, or if I have access to healthy foods. So I have to put that in perspective that, yes, I am a person of color, but I still have some privileges that other people of color do not have. So that is worth mentioning.
Thanks, Jen. I'm going to pass it over to Julia now. This moves into our two-spirited LGBTQ plus section of our presentation, and she will highlight the article that she found, the research, and who wrote it. So take it away, Julia.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight the big issue, which is obviously an underrepresentation of voice in the classroom. And with my findings, the clear idea is that most teachers will agree that everyone deserves the right to education, but our schools often don't reflect this. And often schools can be unsafe, biased institutions that don't support every student and can often limit our students' abilities to learn. And this is especially true for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students. And the reports from various surveys in my article have shown that these students report feeling less safe, feeling less represented, and less valued in our schools compared to their peers. And although conversations and supports are growing in schools for the LGBTQ plus community, there remains a profound silence around these people and their issues in school. So in relation to English language arts classrooms, LGBTQ plus students are still being underrepresented and overlooked because teachers are often uncomfortable with bringing in literature and topics for whole class activities. And this has been studied and reported to be especially true for older teachers. And what ends up happening is teachers resort to using LGBTQ plus literature only for choice readings and not for whole class readings. So some other factors which contribute to the lack of implementing LGBTQ plus literature include comfort and awareness. So this can depend on whether teachers are in rural, suburban, or urban areas, which will differ in school and community size and available resources. A big one is teacher insecurity. So a lot of teachers say that they are comfortable with discussing LGBTQ plus issues or literature, bringing in literature to the classroom. But the difference is that a lot of people just don't do it. They're not actually teaching it and using it. And this is because a lot of teachers are afraid of backlash or challenges from parents or community members. Some teachers don't use them because they simply don't know about them. There is lack of like budgetary issues. And there can also be a lack of supportive resources. So this could be not enough resources in the library, staff isn't supportive, there's no clubs like GSAs, harassment policies in schools might not be updated, and it really depends on whether or not schools have an inclusive curriculum. So I'll just pass it over to Jason now.
Yeah, her research, Julia's research there really ties into the research I found, which was an article called Watch What You Teach. A first-year teacher refuses to play it safe by Nicole Sieben and Lorraine Wolowitz. I mentioned earlier that my comfort is someone else's silence, and they really highlight that idea in the article. Essentially, they say that what we don't teach is making a statement. If we don't teach different representations of LGBTQ plus people, then we're making a statement that it's not important. And it talks about how queer theory in the classroom moves past just anti-homophobia, which is merely just tolerance and assimilation. Basically, what the article says is that we want students to read the word so they can read the world. And we underestimate the immaturity or the maturity level of students. And we assume that parents will be against us. But what if we actually thought that they aligned with us and may be supportive of us? So the article highlights that students look to teachers as models, and that by playing it safe and not going through these issues is the same as condoning heterosexism and discrimination. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Julia again to describe on what we can do about it, aside from just not playing it safe.
Yeah, so just some key things that we can do is that, especially in the ELA classroom, we need to place LGBTQ plus literature within the curriculum and not just on the sidelines or tucked away. And that goes with, we need to represent all students, and I'll talk more about that later in our second topic. But we need to address these topics in literature as well as in discussions. We need to be open with our students. And if we can have our entire class read LGBTQ plus literature, we can bring these discussions to light and inform students and create a more accepting environment that views LGBTQ plus literature as a norm. We also need to educate ourselves and participate in professional development to gain a more expansive collection of LGBTQ plus literature and be able to have these discussions and know how to appropriately and effectively bring them into the classroom. And we also need to be advocates for our students and in turn be advocates for change. And just kind of a reminder that it isn't our place to influence our students to believe anything, but it is the teacher's role to prepare students to live in a diverse society and to create safe spaces for all students in the school by informing students and having class discussions and having those expectations. We also need to support one another. As teachers, we need to build that community that can support each other, which in turn will support our students. And I'll just end with this quote from the article, From Awareness to Action, Teacher Attitude and Implementation of LGBT-Inclusive Curriculum in the English Language Arts Classroom by Michelle Page. ELA teachers could be a powerful resource to support students who are often marginalized and alienated in schools, but they must be equipped with tools, ideas, and allies that will help them to feel empowered so that they in turn can empower their students.
Thanks for that, Julia. The other article I read was Reading the Heteronormative World, Critical Literacy and LGBTQ plus book clubs by Emily Meixner and Rachel Scupp. And basically it's what Julia just highlighted, that there's usually a blind spot when it comes to gender and sexuality, when it comes to social justice in the classroom. We're going to highlight race in a moment here as part of our presentation. And we just want to make clear that the LGBTQ plus isn't an afterthought. It has to be integrated as well. And the article highlights that we can take a critical lens at heteronormativity, and middle school kids, this article is directed at middle school kids, they can read through theory lens, and they can close read, for example, with a queer lens, and looking at different texts with that kind of a lens, and really focusing on resiliency in this community and how people have overcome so many trials and tribulations. And this can look like in the sense of like mini lessons on how to approach different critical lenses, whether it's a Marxist lens or in this case a queer lens. And then the article also said that have a book club where we celebrate LGBTQ plus literature, and we could do critical analyses of heteronormativity in advertisements as an example of an activity, and just try to reject this idea of heteronormativity that we've discussed in class. It's social justice and a queer framework is what the article embraces. And we need to be inclusive, and to be inclusive, we need to be intentional. And students need the vocabulary and the understanding to understand all this, and they need to be taught it explicitly. So to just close this section of our presentation, I'd like to highlight Somewhere Over the Rainbow sticker by Ivan Coyote, a session I went to during the teachers convention. Ivan said that there is power in representation. Kids need to see it. Two-spirit LGBTQ plus representation. And they need to know that they are lovable, worthy, and not alone. The cost for society, Ivan says, for not including two-spirit LGBTQ plus youth is much too high. They're not a marginalized community, they are a targeted community. And the law is on our side is what Ivan's thesis was. You can't discriminate against people. And it's our job as ELA teachers and teachers of all subjects to embrace LGBTQ issues and make sure they're well represented.
Yes, just to help close that out, it's quite important that all the research that we've been doing and that we're talking about is implemented into the classroom, like authentically. Again, you don't want it to be seen as an afterthought and just trying to fit the criteria of like the 21st century lens where we're inclusive of everyone, because students will be able to tell if you genuinely care about the topic or about that issue at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to go over to our next topic, race. A lot of these ideas that we talked about are so applicable to all of these issues. And so similar to my opening for LGBTQ+, all students have a right to learn in safe, inclusive, and engaging environments. And along with our topic, which is diversity of voices, that means not just bringing in literature and having different representations, but also allowing opportunities for our students to have a voice. So as teachers, especially in the ELA classroom, we need to empower our students through their words and our words and give them confidence to use their voices. And that means that we need to provide students with representations of diverse voices and provide our students with opportunities to express themselves and share their ideas with one another. So we can do this by providing opportunities for students to turn their stories and their experiences into something more, which can help develop their writing skills. And it's important to remember that when we invite students to share their voices in the classroom, we need to make space for them by engaging and listening to what they have to say. And as teachers, we have a choice to either shut the door on our students' authentic voices or to invite them in. And if we choose to invite all of our students' voices into the classroom, we need to provide them with authentic reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and representing opportunities so that they can express themselves and develop a strong voice. Mm-hmm. So I can just pass that on to you, Jen.
Yeah, so within my research, I kind of tried to look at practical things that we could bring into the classroom that looked past maybe just picture books, children's books, because as we get into the older grades, yes, you can bring picture books into middle school and high school, but personally, I feel like they might lose their like chutzpah, because kids are like, oh, it's a picture book, so they may not pay attention to the underlying messages of them all. So I had 3 articles that I looked at for myself, and one of the first ones was by Violet J. Harris, who is a PhD, who has a PhD in reading education. She found that books, novels, or TV shows, slash even sometimes music that are humorous, that either contain animals, feature people that look like them, and focus on adventure and or happy endings are more relative to the kids at hand. She has found that through her studies. It makes kids more interested in what they are learning. She also pointed out that by making the characters in the TV shows, in the books, and even in the main characters in like in music and stuff, racially ambiguous, allows students to put themselves into those shoes without thinking that they are overstepping. So that is one of the biggest points I took from her paper. It's a very short paper, only about 4 pages, but her pointing out that racially ambiguous people in children's books and novels actually add to more of an awareness and empathy towards people of other cultures, other genders, that type of deal. The second article I also looked at was evaluating cultural authenticity in the classroom. It is by, I might butcher the name, but Yoon Gang Yo Lee, Lauren Fowler, and Denise Atkins. So it is looking at it's looking at not just picture books, but student references focusing around Asian American, Hispanic, and African American texts. One thing I would like to point out though, is that throughout my research, it was a little bit harder to find stuff that talks more about Indigenous ways of integrating into the ELA classroom. Not as many articles as with the other races, unfortunately, so that just meant a little bit more digging, but that's okay. So within this article about evaluating cultural authenticity, they had 2 main points, and was that when you go out and present culture to your students and diversity to your students, you need to make sure you have done a thorough content analyses in it. So you're not just going through like BuzzFeed's list or New York Times list and saying, these are the best books for Hispanic students, these are the best book for Asian American students. You need to go out and actually check that book for yourself. You need to make sure it fits into your curriculum and that you're not just adding it to fit some type of unwritten agenda. And then after you pick those books, you have to go into an in-depth analysis. They found throughout their research is that a lot of these books and TV shows sometimes reinforce stereotypes. So with the Hispanic works, they saw that the male was the head of the family, the strong one, where Latino or Hispanic women were seen as submissive. They saw in the Asian American works, Asian Canadian works, that they were usually the smartest kid in the class. They had to work hard. Their parents weren't as comforting, weren't as there. They just had to focus on school. And then with African books or Black books, they saw that they were usually the sidekick. So just because they have these people of color within their resources or within these TV shows or within the music does not mean they're actually helping the conversation go forward. Yes, you can bring these resources in and you can talk about why is a Black person seen as a sidekick? Why is it only Asian Americans seen as very smart or hardworking? It does allow for those conversations to be open in a classroom, but you need to be prepared for that, obviously, just like we've talked about. And you have to be able to move past that uncomfortable feeling that you feel. And lastly, to touch on Indigenous readings and integration, it is obviously a great thing that we have our TKS 5, which helps us integrate FMNI into our classroom. But obviously it goes past that. I think while integrating FMNI into the classroom, personally myself, I feel like sometimes I can be on the same level as them, which allows me to be a little bit more open, and I'm not as uncomfortable talking about the issues that they have been through because I have some type of relatability towards them. Obviously, our struggles are not the same, and it's different as we're in Canada, but I think by being open and showcasing Indigenous works just sporadically throughout the class so that it's not seen like I'm trying to push it is essential. So like the article talked about, I don't know if anyone knows, but the show Corner Gas from Saskatchewan. They had an Indigenous actor who played the cop, but they never made it a big fact that he was Indigenous. I don't think it's mentioned in the show. And that's what the article I read kind of pushed towards, like just make them have the same opportunities as everyone else, and students will pick up. If they like the show, they will research what they want to know. And then they will find out like, oh, that's an Indigenous actor. That's awesome. They didn't try to like push it onto us. So obviously race is really finicky to talk about, especially if you are Caucasian. It's a little bit easier for me to talk about. But yeah, that's what the 3 articles I looked at talked about mostly, and I think they're quite informational.
That's great, Jen. Thank you for that. To wrap up this conversation, I'd like to point out that we've covered quite a bit here, but I think a main thing is that what we don't teach, we do teach. That's called the null curriculum that we're all very aware of. So if we're not purposeful in our representation and our diversity of voices in the ELA classroom, we do our students a disservice. Critical pedagogy is knowledge can be political for sure, but we need to promote social justice and equity in our classroom and equity of opportunity, because being neutral is standing on the side of the oppressors. And if we want to transform society, we have to do our part as teachers. The influence and implications are clear. If we misrepresent and underrepresent, we harm kids, not only those targeted youth, but those who aren't, because they'll continue to perpetuate what is being wrong with society, and society won't improve. We have the power to bring in the literature we want, and we have the power to transform our society as teachers. So any closing thoughts, Julia or Jen?
No, you summed that up pretty well. I was like, I don't want to say anything afterwards because it will, see, look what happened. But yeah, no, you, you summed that up perfectly.
Power to the teachers. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.